Wow. I've got a lot of meetings coming up, both in person and on Zoom. I got to say, though, that is one thing that is a gift to me from COVID, is the fact that some of my meetings can happen right here in my house via Zoom. It keeps us from traveling all around. I mean, it's different, but I was thinking about meetings the other day, and some of the meetings that I have and ones that I still had to schedule and everything else. And I remembered that one of the very first words that our youngest son, Martin, ever shared was, or ever said was, meeting. And his first sentence was a short sentence, but it was basically daddy meeting. And that was because daddy always had meetings. Daddy was always going to a meeting. And, in some ways I feel really bad about that, but in other ways I think, there was a lot that happened in some of those meetings. And yes, we all can be meeting to death. And I know that for many of you, you got meetings at work, you got meetings at school for your kids, you got meetings for groups that you're a part of, you've got meetings for church. You got so many that sometimes it feels it's just so overwhelming. But here's the thing. Sometimes meetings can be places of renewal. Sometimes meetings can be places where you can get hope and excitement. And that's why I think it is really interesting that the very first thing that Jesus does after the resurrection, the very first thing is he calls a meeting. It's true. You may not believe this, but it really is true. In fact, Jesus even warned his disciples that there was going to be a meeting. They didn't understand it at the time because he said, I'm going to die and then I'll be resurrected and then we're going to have this meeting. You're going to meet me in Galilee. I mean, he gave them a warning about that. But then the very first thing that happens is Jesus calling this meeting. And first he sends the message about the meeting through the angels, because right after the resurrection, we hear the story in Matthew chapter 28 where the women had gone to the tomb and they hear the earthquake and they see the stone rolled away, and then they have this angel come up to them, and this angel says to them, "Do not be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. Come and see the place where they laid him. And then quickly," he says, "go and tell his disciples that he has been raised from the dead and he is going ahead of them to Galilee. There you will see him." Some translations say, "There you will meet him." See, Jesus calling a meeting. But then, just to make sure that they get the message about this meeting, 3 verses later, Jesus actually appears to those same women, but Jesus tells them, "Now go, do not be afraid, go tell my brothers to go to Galilee, there I will see them." Go tell them it's time for a meeting. And you know what? At that meeting with the disciples, Jesus tells them about his plan. And he tells them to go to Galilee for this meeting, and then he tells them about his plan. Now, theologians and Bible scholars, they're kind of mixed as to why they think Jesus had this meeting in Galilee, because at the time they were in Jerusalem, and Galilee is about 40 miles away from where they were. So really, when Jesus is calling this meeting, he's calling this retreat, and they're not really sure. Scholars aren't really agreed on why it had to happen in Galilee. Some say it happened in Galilee because that's where his ministry took place. Some said that it was called in Galilee because they felt like that would be the place that their ministry would be launched. Others really think that the reason Jesus called this time with his disciples in Galilee is because they had to get out of Jerusalem, because that was a place of danger. They needed to get out of and away from all the craziness and busyness and death that was going on in Jerusalem. They had to get away from all that conflict so they could sit with Jesus and hear the message that he had for them. And it was essential that Jesus call this meeting so that he can give that message to the disciples. Now, one person I read said, "The resurrected Jesus resurrected his disciples by inviting them away from the despair and death that was the cross and into the hope that was new life of the resurrection." That's what this particular meeting was all about, to resurrect the disciples and give them hope. And Brian McLaren said that the reason this took place in Galilee is because Jesus is going to tell them about a new uprising, an uprising of a different kind that's going to be happening. And he needs them to come away from Jerusalem, where the uprising was really an uprising that was much different than what Jesus wanted to call them to. Brian McLaren says that this uprising that Jesus was calling to was an uprising of hope, not hate. It was an uprising of love, not weapons. It was an uprising of shouts of joyful promise of life and peace, not of angry threats and hostility and death. It was an uprising of an outstretched hands, not clenched fists. You know, if you think about it, sometimes I think that's exactly what we need. You know, sometimes we find ourselves being so busy, sometimes busy with meetings, that we really need to have a different kind of meeting, a different kind of invitation to come away from all the stress and conflict and everything that's going on, and let's sit together and let us hear the plan. Let us plan together. Let us together find out what it is that we're being called to do as a church and as individual Christians. And that was the purpose of this meeting that Jesus had in Galilee. Come to Galilee, come away from all of this, and let us find a time to sit and listen and be energized and find hope. You know, I don't know that all the meetings that we experience anywhere will be like that kind of meeting, but really my hope and prayer is we'll find that kind of place to sit with other Christians who think like us, or maybe want what much of what we want out of life, could sit together and make a plan of how we can really impact this world with the gospel that Jesus gives us. That is what the meeting that Jesus calls his disciples to. Come away and let us together figure out how we, as followers of Jesus, can have an impact on the world around us. That was the first meeting that happened right after the resurrection, and it was an important meeting, and perhaps it's one that we need to have so that we can figure out what is the impact we're called to have in this great uprising that the gospel calls us to.